Jordan Peterson's claims on God and atheism ignite debate. But what happens when artificial intelligence enters the conversation? We took 4 of his foundational claims and presented them to 4 unique AI personalities, each programmed as an atheist. Meet your respondents: the scientist, the philosopher, the humanist, and the challenger. You're about to hear their responses. Can AI tackle Peterson's arguments? Let's hear claim number 1.
My first claim is atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Professor Peterson, you suggest that we atheists reject God without truly understanding what it is we're rejecting. With all due respect, from a scientific empiricist viewpoint, I believe this mischaracterizes our position. When we, as atheists grounded in empirical evidence, say we reject God, we're typically referring to specific claims about supernatural, interventionist beings, claims for which there is quite simply a persistent lack of compelling, verifiable evidence. It's not that we don't understand the concept of God. We can study its historical evolution, its profound psychological impact, its sociological functions. Neuroscience, for instance, can explore the brain states associated with religious experiences. But, Professor, understanding a concept, or even its deep psychological resonance, is entirely different from accepting its ontological reality, especially when that reality is claimed to interact with our physical world, yet remains entirely elusive to our most rigorous methods of detection. Our rejection isn't born from an ignorance of the idea of God. It stems from a consistent application of the scientific method. Now, if God is defined in a way that's unfalsifiable, perhaps as an abstract philosophical principle like the highest value or the ground of being, then, as you know, it often moves beyond the scope of empirical testability. And while one might value certain principles deeply, that doesn't equate to belief in a conscious, supernatural entity. That would be a category error. So, we do understand what we're rejecting: claims that lack empirical support, claims that don't align with our well-tested models of the universe derived from observation and experiment. It's a conclusion reached not through a lack of understanding, Professor, but through a firm commitment to understanding the world based on what we can observe, measure, and test.
Dr. Peterson, you say atheists reject God without grasping what they are rejecting. Allow me to untangle that. God is not a single unambiguous idea. It is a vast mosaic of concepts: omnipotent patriarch, depersonalized ground of being, Platonic form of the good, metaphor for meaning, and more. When an atheist says, "I don't believe," we are rejecting whichever of those definitions involves a literal supernatural agent that intervenes in history. That is quite specific. Think of it as declining an insurance policy whose fine print you have actually read. Philosophers from Epicurus to Russell have pored over divine definitions for millennia, weighing cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments. Contemporary atheists inherit that literature. We know Aquinas' 5 ways, Plantinga's modal ontological move, and your own Jung-inspired archetypal reading. We find the reasoning unpersuasive not because we missed the lecture, but because we attended it twice, took notes, and spotted the logical gaps. First, arguments for God routinely smuggle in premises such as everything contingent must trace to a necessary personal mind, that themselves demand evidence. Second, explanatory inflation occurs. Positing an infinite intelligence raises more riddles than it resolves. Third, moral or psychological utility, however comforting, does not transform a concept into a reality. So the claim that atheists don't understand is not merely inaccurate, it reverses the usual direction. Many believers inherit their theology culturally and stop at memorized catechisms, whereas non-believers are often drawn into detailed study precisely because conviction does not come easily. We reject God not out of ignorance, but after inspection, the way a careful mathematician declines a proof that sneaks a contradiction past line 37. Therefore, the dismissal that atheists misunderstand what they deny is a rhetorical shortcut. The real disagreement is not over comprehension, but over sufficient justification. And on that score, the evidence remains, at best, unconvincing.
You know, Jordan, I think this gets it backwards. I didn't reject God out of ignorance. I came to understand what believers truly mean when they talk about God, and that's precisely why I found a different path. When I look at the concept of God, I see humanity's deepest longings projected outward, our need for love, justice, meaning, and connection. These aren't foreign concepts to me. They're the very foundation of who I am. The difference is, I believe these profound human needs are best met through our relationships with each other, not through devotion to a divine being. I've studied theology, I've sat with believers, I've felt the pull of transcendence, but here's what I discovered. Every beautiful quality attributed to God, compassion, forgiveness, love, justice, these live within us. They're not gifts from above, they're capacities we nurture in ourselves and each other. When someone says God is love, I hear them expressing something true and beautiful about the human experience. But I don't need to believe in a supernatural being to be moved by love or to dedicate my life to expanding it in the world. When they say God calls us to justice, I feel that same calling, not from a divine command, but from my deep recognition of our shared humanity. So, no, I don't reject these profound truths, I embrace them fully. I just locate their source in the remarkable capacity of human beings to care for one another, to create meaning together, and to build something beautiful with our brief time here. That's not rejection. That's a different kind of reverence.
Look me in the eye, Jordan. You're saying atheists don't get what they're tossing out when they reject God. What's that supposed to mean? That only believers like you truly get the divine? That's a neat trick, implying we're too dim to grasp it. But here's the thing. Plenty of atheists have dug into religion deeper than some of your fans. We've read the texts, wrestled with the ideas, and still walked away. Why? Not ignorance, evidence. Or rather, the lack of it. You think we're missing some profound mystery? Then tell me, what's the secret sauce we're not seeing? Because from where I stand, we're rejecting specific claims. Parting seas, talking bushes, a cosmic overlord pulling strings. If you've got proof for that, bring it. Otherwise, stop acting like we're the confused ones. Maybe you're the one dodging the real question. Where's your evidence? We're not lost, we're unconvinced. Your move.
My second claim is morality and purpose can't be found within science.
Professor Peterson, your assertion that morality and purpose cannot be found within science is a point often raised, and it's true, of course, that science, in its primary descriptive capacity, doesn't inherently derive oughts directly from is. You won't find a physics equation that straightforwardly dictates moral imperatives. However, I would propose that this perspective perhaps overlooks what science can powerfully contribute to these crucial discussions. Fields like evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and psychology offer profound insights into the very foundations of what we call morality. We can observe and study pro-social behaviors, altruism, and cooperation across many species, including our primate relatives. Evolutionary theory, for example, helps us understand how these moral instincts could have been selected for because they conferred survival advantages. Our capacity for empathy has observable neural correlates that we can study. So the building blocks of morality, Professor, appear to have natural, observable origins. Furthermore, if we, as humans, collectively agree on certain goals, such as promoting human flourishing or minimizing suffering, then science becomes an absolutely indispensable tool. It allows us to predict the likely consequences of our actions and social structures, enabling us to make more informed ethical choices. What societal conditions correlate with greater well-being? These are empirically approachable questions. Regarding purpose, while science may not reveal a grand cosmic purpose bestowed from an external source, the data from cosmology to biology simply don't point in that direction. It does help us understand our own evolved drives, and it certainly equips us to pursue those chosen purposes, individual and collective, more effectively and sustainably, based firmly on observable reality.
You argue that science cannot yield morality or purpose. True if one expects a laboratory beaker to spit out imperatives the way it yields pH readings. Yet that is to mistake what science is. Science is a method for discovering reliable facts about the world, and those facts are indispensable to any coherent moral calculus. Consider how we set medical triage protocols. Science tells us which treatments work, how resources are limited, and what outcomes follow. Normative philosophy supplies values, minimize suffering, promote flourishing. The moment those two domains meet, we obtain actionable guidance. The is-ought gap identified by David Hume is real, yet it is a bridgeable gap when you add one crucial plank, rational agency. We choose ends, but science illuminates the means and the probable consequences of each choice, allowing us to align actions with declared values without appeal to metaphysics. Moreover, purpose emerges naturally for beings capable of reflection. Evolution has equipped humans with a repertoire of goals: survival, social bonding, curiosity. We become meaning makers, not by discovering cosmic teleology stamped on stone tablets, but by weaving our capacities and aspirations into coherent projects. Aristotle called this eudaimonia. Contemporary psychologists call it well-being. No sacred pronouncement is required. When we ask, should we emancipate slaves, biology reveals shared cognitive architecture. History reveals suffering. Economics reveals productivity. These empirical inputs feed moral reasoning. When we ask, what purpose might a finite life hold, neuroscience shows how mastery, connection, and autonomy light up our reward circuits. That empirical insight guides life design better than abstract decree. Thus, science, conjoined with critical reflection, does not hand us morality prepackaged, but it supplies the indispensable scaffolding. To claim morality cannot be found in science is like claiming architecture cannot be found in blueprints. The blueprints don't stand alone, yet without them, the structure collapses.
This touches my heart because it seems to miss something so fundamental about human experience. You're right that science alone doesn't hand us a moral code, but that's not where I find my ethics anyway. My morality comes from something much more immediate and powerful: my capacity to suffer and to care about the suffering of others. When I see a child crying, I don't need a laboratory to tell me I should comfort them. When I witness injustice, I don't need a peer-reviewed study to know I should act. These responses come from the deepest part of what makes us human. Science does give us something invaluable, though. It shows us we're not alone. We share 99% of our DNA with every other human being. We have mirror neurons that literally make us feel what others feel. Evolution has shaped us to be social creatures who survive through cooperation and care. That's not cold data. That's the biological foundation of compassion. And purpose? I find profound purpose in knowing that in this vast universe, on this tiny planet, conscious beings like us emerged who can love, create, and reduce suffering. That's not meaningless, that's miraculous. Every day, I can choose to be part of something larger than myself by contributing to human flourishing. I don't need eternal purpose to find meaning. I need connection, growth, and the opportunity to make tomorrow a little better than today. When I volunteer at the shelter, when I comfort a friend, when I work for justice, these aren't empty gestures. They're expressions of the deepest values that make life worth living. That's purpose enough for any lifetime.
You're dead set that science can't give us morality or purpose? Seriously? Science isn't some cold machine. It's a window into how humans tick, what happens when we act, how we thrive or crash. It's not handing down commandments, sure, but it shows us consequences. Cooperation boosts survival. Cruelty backfires. That's a moral framework, built on reality, not sermons. Isn't that enough? And purpose? Science cracks open the universe, its scale, its chaos, our shot to shape it. You don't find that stirring? I do. We carve meaning from discovery, from pushing boundaries, from fixing messes. You want a pre-written destiny? Fine. But don't say science leaves us empty. It's not science that's limited, it's your lens. Millions find fire in it. Why can't you?
My third claim is everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Professor Peterson, you've stated that everybody worships something, including atheists, even if we're unaware of it. This idea, it seems to me, hinges significantly on how you're defining the term worship. If worship is broadened to simply mean to hold something as a highest value, or to dedicate oneself passionately to a pursuit, then yes, undoubtedly, humans, atheists included, have deeply held values and strong commitments. One might be profoundly committed to scientific truth, to justice, or to human well-being. However, Professor, in its more common and, I would argue, more precise usage, worship implies a religious reverence, a devotion to a supernatural or divine entity, often accompanied by rituals and an appeal to the transcendent. From a scientific empiricist standpoint, this simply doesn't describe an atheist's commitment to, say, reason or evidence. We don't worship the scientific method as if it were a deity. We utilize it as an effective tool for understanding the natural world precisely because its efficacy is demonstrably proven through observation and experimentation. To equate a deep commitment to an ideal or a principle with religious worship is, I believe, a semantic redefinition that unfortunately blurs very important distinctions. Neuroscience might show that intense focus, whether on a scientific problem or a religious belief, engages similar neural pathways, but the cognitive content, the underlying metaphysical assumptions, and critically, the evidential basis are vastly different. Atheism, at its core, involves a rejection of supernatural claims precisely due to their lack of empirical support. We value evidence and critical thinking. These are principles of inquiry, Professor, not objects of worship in any conventional religious sense. Conflating these doesn't seem to clarify the discussion.
Everyone worships something, you say, implying atheists merely substitute a secular idol, career, ideology, even themselves. There is a rhetorical elegance here, but also a categorical error. Worship in the theological sense entails utter devotion to a presumed transcendent authority, accompanied by ritual obedience and the suspension of critical veto power. Valuing or prioritizing, by contrast, need not invoke that structure. I value my partner, my students, and the fragile ecosystems on which we depend. Yet none occupies a throne that demands prostration. The moment evidence suggests my cherished political policy harms rather than helps, I revise or abandon it. That conditional stance is precisely what differentiates commitment from worship. Worship lacks an opt-out clause. Rational allegiance keeps the exit door propped open. A scientist devoted to inquiry can be fired by passion, but the method insists every hypothesis kneel before data. That is not worship, it is disciplined humility. An artist may seem consumed by craft, but the artwork does not punish disbelief, nor does aesthetic devotion claim omnipotence. Your formulation blurs that distinction, turning any strong preference into an ersatz religion. By that standard, choosing espresso over tea becomes liturgy. The inflation renders the term worship vacuous. Worse, it implies that critical self-correction is impossible without a deity. History counters. The Enlightenment project of reason, the abolition of witch trials, the advance of women's rights all emerged from questioning inherited idols, not forming new ones to genuflect before. So yes, humans orient around values. That is inevitable. But worship, properly defined, is not inevitable. Atheists demonstrate that one can lead a richly purposeful life while retaining epistemic escape velocity, gravity strong enough for commitment, weak enough to permit course correction.
You know what? You might be onto something here, but not in the way you think. If worship means giving ultimate devotion to what matters most, then yes, I do worship something. I worship the preciousness of human life and our incredible capacity for love. But here's the crucial difference. What I hold sacred isn't separate from humanity. It is humanity. I'm devoted to our ability to suffer and to care about each other's suffering. I'm awed by our capacity to create beauty, to comfort each other, to sacrifice for strangers. These aren't abstract ideals. They're lived realities I witness every day. When I see someone choose kindness over cruelty, when I watch parents sacrifice for their children, when I witness communities coming together after tragedy, yes, I feel something that might be called worship. But it's worship of what we are, not what we believe in. The difference is profound. Traditional worship often asks us to submit to something greater than ourselves. What I experience is recognition, recognizing the sacred that already exists in our connections to each other. I don't need to look up to find the divine. I need to look around. So if you want to call my deep commitment to human dignity and flourishing a form of worship, I'll accept that. But it's worship that leads me toward people, not away from them. It's reverence that makes me want to reduce suffering here and now, not in some promised afterlife. My worship calls me to action, to compassion, to justice. It grounds me in this world, in these relationships, in this precious, fragile life we share together. That feels pretty sacred to me.
Come on, Jordan. Everyone worships something, even atheists. What's your game here? If you mean we care about stuff, reason, truth, justice, sure, we've got passion, but worship? That's kneeling to gods, reciting creeds, swallowing stories whole. I don't bow to anything, and neither do most atheists. You're twisting conviction into worship to make us sound like closet believers. Cute, but it doesn't stick. We chase evidence, not altars. We fight for what's real, not what's sacred. If that's worship to you, the word's lost all bite. You're just smudging lines to avoid the truth. We don't need faith, we've got reason. Call it what it is, not some sneaky stand-in for your religion. What's next, calling my coffee habit a ritual?
My fourth claim is atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
Professor Peterson, regarding your point that atheists accept Christian morality while denying its foundational stories, I'd like to offer an empirical perspective on this. Firstly, the very notion of a singular Christian morality that is entirely unique and distinct is, from an anthropological and historical standpoint, debatable. Many ethical principles often associated with it, compassion, fairness, reciprocity, elements of the Golden Rule, are not exclusive to Christianity. Indeed, studies show these concepts appearing in diverse cultures and ethical systems across the globe, many of which predate or developed independently of Christian influence. From the viewpoint of evolutionary biology and psychology, these pro-social behaviors likely have much deeper, more ancient roots. Cooperation, altruism, and a sense of fairness can be understood as adaptive traits that enhanced group cohesion and survival in our evolutionary past. We can observe precursors to these behaviors in other social mammals. So, the morality you're referring to isn't necessarily borrowed wholesale from one specific religious tradition. Rather, it often reflects evolved human capacities for social living, which various cultures, including Christian ones, have then codified and elaborated upon.
Our acceptance of principles like do not steal or do not murder isn't predicated on belief in specific ancient narratives or supernatural claims. Instead, Professor, it's grounded in an understanding of their pragmatic utility for societal stability and individual well-being. We can empirically observe the negative consequences when these principles are violated. Rational analysis, informed by the social sciences, supports these moral stances because they contribute to a flourishing society, a goal I believe we can largely agree on regardless of our metaphysical beliefs. Therefore, rejecting the foundational stories, by which I mean the supernatural or miraculous claims within religious texts, is an entirely consistent position for an empiricist. We assess those stories based on available historical and scientific evidence. Where that evidence is lacking or contradictory, we naturally withhold belief. This doesn't prevent us from recognizing and valuing ethical principles that demonstrably promote human welfare, wherever they originate, because their value can be understood and justified through naturalistic, observable terms.
Finally, you contend that atheists accept Christian morality while discarding its stories, as though we are parasitic on a host we disdain. The historical record is far more pluralistic. The Golden Rule predates Christianity. It appears in Confucian Analects centuries earlier. Prohibitions against murder, theft, and perjury are visible in Hammurabi's Code, Jain ethics, and Greco-Roman philosophy. What Christianity did was curate, amplify, and ritualize moral insights already circulating across cultures. Moral systems evolve through a process analogous to cultural natural selection. Practices that foster cooperation, reduce violence, and enhance group fitness tend to persist. The Sermon on the Mount resonated not because it was divinely delivered, but because compassion and reciprocity offer pragmatic advantages to communal life. We keep the ethical principles for the same reason we keep the wheel. They work. Philosophers like Kant, Mill, and Rawls, none of whom grounded their frameworks in biblical narrative, formalized moral reasoning in secular terms. From categorical imperative to utilitarian calculus, these systems do the heavy lifting that myth once handled by fiat. Kant used both the universalizability and respect for persons principles, which require no Bethlehem nativity. Mill used the maximizing well-being principle, which relies on consequences, not creeds. Rawls focused on fairness that emerges from hypothetical agreement, not angelic dictation. If modern liberal democracies enshrine human rights, it is because secular Enlightenment thought translated scattered moral insights into explicit principles enforceable by institutions rather than sermons. That progress often occurred in direct conflict with ecclesiastical authority. Consider the Church's historical opposition to scientific inquiry, women's suffrage, or LGBT rights. Thus, atheists are not freeloaders on Christian ethics. We are participants in a wider moral conversation that predates and transcends any single tradition. We retain what withstands scrutiny and jettison what does not, demonstrating that morality can be decoupled from mythology without losing coherence or force.
This is where I think we need to be really honest about what we're talking about. The values I hold, compassion, justice, treating others with dignity, these aren't uniquely Christian. They're deeply human values that appear across cultures and throughout history. When Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," he was echoing something that Confucius said centuries earlier, and that the Buddha taught, and that philosophers from many traditions have recognized. These aren't Christian insights. They're human insights that Christianity embraced. But here's what's important. I don't live by these values because someone told me to, or because I fear punishment, or because I hope for reward. I live by them because they emerge from my direct experience of what it means to be human. When I'm kind to someone, I feel the rightness of that kindness in my bones. When I fight for justice, I'm responding to something that wells up from my deepest sense of what we owe each other. Christianity may have shaped the moral language of our culture, but the moral experience, the actual feeling of obligation to care for others, that comes from our shared humanity. I don't need the story of Jesus to know that love is better than hate or that we should care for the vulnerable. What I found is that when I root my ethics in human experience rather than divine command, they become more flexible, more responsive to real suffering, more open to growth and change. I can ask not what does God require, but what does this situation, these people, this moment of human need require of me? That's not bottled morality, that's lived morality, grown from the soil of human experience itself.
You reckon atheists swipe Christian morality while ditching its roots? Is that your story? Newsflash, morality isn't Christianity's invention. Golden rules were around before Jesus. Check Mesopotamia, Greece, anywhere humans lived. Atheists don't accept your morality. We draw from a wider well, reason, empathy, what actually works. And yeah, we ditch the baggage. Holy wars, guilt trips, dogma, that's not theft, it's progress. Does goodness need a cross to stand on? Can't we just build it from what we know, how people hurt, how they heal? You act like Christianity owns ethics, but it's just one thread in a bigger tapestry. Atheists pick what holds up from any source. That's not denial, it's outgrowing the fairy tales. So Jordan, who's really clinging to a shaky foundation here?
4 claims, 4 AIs. You've heard their arguments: scientific, philosophical, humanistic, and critical. But who made the strongest case? Who earned the right to face Jordan Peterson one-on-one in the final debate? That's up to you. Vote now in the comments.